Hey everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of people in my network, the leaders in my network. So these are great leads to get to those books that have made the most impact on them, have made the most, provided the best value in their lives, in their work, in their business, whatever it may be. And in this series, I cover three categories of books. The first category where they're sharing with me a book that I haven't read. The second category where I'm covering a book with them that we've both read, whether specifically for the series or we read it before the series even launched. The third category is when I have the author and or publisher on to discuss the book that they're putting out there in the world or have published, just to put a face, a name, a story, a backstory to that book, to give it a little more substance and see what's behind that book. And in this particular episode, my guest is Tyler Snure, and Tyler writes fantasy novels that get kids and teens back into reading. He established Snure Stories and published his first novel, The Jewels of Fate, in 2019 when he was a senior in high school. And The Sword of Sorinth is the second book in his fiction, fantasy, adventure, and trilogy, and was released in 2022. It was quickly ranked as number 8 on Amazon's bestseller list for its category. He has presented at conferences, online summits, schools, libraries, boards of education, and has been featured on multiple podcasts. And he's frequently talking about the importance of reading and starting a business as a young entrepreneur. When I launched this series, I'm in the leadership field, so I thought it would be a lot of leadership books. I thought it would be a lot of self-help books. And then a couple dozen episodes in, people would start reaching out to come on, and they were novelists, so they wanted to cover one of their novels. So in that time, I've had on authors sharing their novels. And there's value to that, even if something is fiction, because there's somewhere that story came from. So I'm always curious about how somebody creates a story, creates a world, what it is that influenced them and impacted them in getting to that book and putting that book out there. Tyler had reached out about the series coming on and sharing his work. So I'm excited to talk to him, especially as a fan of entrepreneurship myself, and especially as one who's interested in getting younger people out there and getting their work out there and just seeing what they're capable of and not leaving it to school or college to dictate what things should look like, especially when it's creative. So Tyler, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
So before we start, who are you today, Tyler? You had written your first book when you were a senior in high school, but what are you up to these days? Is it full-time book? Is it other things that you're into these days? What are you all about today? What are you up to today?
For sure. I would say currently where I'm at, it's full-time book for sure, but that can mean a lot of different things because I have multiple projects going on at the same time that are all part of my my company right now. So the first is my third book that I'm focusing on. It'll release sometime this year in 2025. I'm also a screenwriter, so I have that going on as well. I'm currently working on a second screenplay while starting to market and pitch my first one to producers. And then I've also moved into kind of a different branch of my business where I actually now I'm working with parents to create reading strategies and reading plans for their reluctant readers. So all of that's going on at the same time, but it's all part of my brand, Snure Stories.
Yeah. So when you say you're working with parents and their reluctant readers, what does that look like? How did you come up with that? What does that look like?
Well, it wasn't something that I kind of came up with on the spot. It was more I saw a need in the market that needed to be filled. And as I was promoting my books and as I was engaging with readers and especially parents of those readers, so many parents would come up to me and say, I would love to buy this book for my kid, but they don't read. Or, good for you for writing at such a young age. I can't even get my own kid to pick up a book, just sayings like that. And after you hear it 100 times or so, you realize that there is such a need in the market for that. And reluctant reader has become such a huge thing, and literacy and reading is on the decline.
So at this point, I typically ask, what is it that led you to this point, Tyler, specifically for you? How old are you now?
23.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus, you're half my age, man. That's incredible. So what is it that led you to this point now? What is it that led you to be able to get to the point where you published your first book as a senior in high school? What led up to that? What's the story behind just getting that first book out there?
Yeah, so The Jewels of Fate actually started as a short story. It took 5 years to write, but it was kind of off and on throughout that time period. So around the age of 12, 13, I was sitting in class and my teacher just told us to write something, whatever we wanted. It was some creative writing exercise. So I wrote The Jewels of Fate as a short story, and it grew and slowly evolved over the next 5 years to become the novel that it is today.
So was that prompt from that teacher that day? Was that your first foray really into writing, or were you doing writing before that?
I was, but not as seriously, and with no intention of getting published. It wasn't until I started this specific story. And I'd say it still probably took a year or two after that point before I knew I wanted to get it published. And I knew it was a story that others would want to read and could relate to. But kind of that was the tipping point.
So what was your process for when you decided that you wanted to write this? What was that? What did that look like navigating the whole publishing process? How did you go about that?
At first, I wanted to traditionally publish, and that's the avenue I went down for about 6 months to a year, roughly. And then I realized the more I research I did, and the more I talked to other authors, and the more I learned about the industry, I realized that there's so much more creative freedom and benefits from self-publishing.
Yeah.
Not to say that traditional publishing is bad, and if it's a right fit for you, then go for it. But I did
Yeah.
realize that it wasn't a right fit for me, and the alternative self-publishing would have been much better for me. And 6 years later, I can confidently say it was the right choice.
So what did your parents, your background, were they writers as well? Or even as hobbies? What did you see when you were a kid? Did you see that kind of creativity and artistry in the household?
Absolutely. We're a very creative family. Even though like my sister and my dad aren't creative in the sense that they do that kind of thing, like they practice it. But me and my sister were constantly raised to pursue what we wanted to do, even if that was in the arts, which traditionally you don't make a lot of money at first doing that unless you get really, really good at it, and you get a big break or something like that. But we were always encouraged to pursue that. And even as I started developing writing by the age of, I think, 7, I started to write. My parents continually poured that into me. And my mom actually wrote a children's book when I was little too. I
Oh,
would have been, I think, 4 or 5 at the time. And it was a children's book about me being an older brother and my sister being born. So not only was it cool to have a mom as a writer at that age, but it was also so cool to be the main character in someone else's book.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I think some of the my mother-in-law did that for my first son when he was a baby, maybe 1, 2 years old, and got him a book where he was the main character. And it's just something about seeing yourself on the page. I mean, when you're a kid
Yeah,
and you see these books, it's like, oh my God, this is somewhere far away world. And just to see yourself on the page, whether it's a picture book or not, it's just incredible to see yourself captured, in such a way that's, if you take care of it, it's going to live on forever.
absolutely.
Um, so obviously it makes sense from your childhood that this is what you're doing now. I mean,
Mhm.
it seems like it, from like your parents' influence to your teacher with that prompting challenge that you had. So this is it for your career, right?
This I can't see myself doing anything different. And others have told me things that I'd be good at. Like so many friends and family have told me I'd make a great teacher. Maybe I would, but I just can't see myself being a teacher for, you know, 50 years or however long your career is.
And listen, I'm just a humble podcast host here, but I think if you have that creativity, um, and you have this foray, this business into reluctant readers and wanting kids to pick up reading in a certain way. Just my opinion is like it's when teachers have that kind of passion for what they do that they stand out the most and they're the most effective. because you have a way, you were drawn into reading, you were drawn into writing, so you have a way of conveying its importance to students if you were ever to become a teacher. I think that the most difficult part of teaching, or what gets lost, is connecting the material and the kid. Like, why is this important? I can teach you this, I can show you this, you can take notes, you can memorize it, you can regurgitate it, but why is it important? So I like how, if you were to be a teacher, even as young as you are now, you're that close to that material, you're that close to that passion. I think that's what's missing so oftentimes in education, is what that passion, that drive, and that fire is behind somebody, and why they're doing what's, the tool, the craft that's at hand.
Exactly. And in some ways, I find I am a teacher because I
Oh
do
yeah,
do a lot of
absolutely.
podcasts and interviews, and I speak at a lot of conferences and events. And maybe even for someone listening to this podcast right now, this is a teaching moment for you,
Absolutely.
therefore making me a teacher in a way. So I see the skills kind of in both, but I wouldn't want to be a teacher in the sense of working in a school environment. I like the creative freedom that my business has and that my books bring me. But although I do enjoy sharing and teaching and providing my experience in the hope of helping others, for sure.
Yeah, that's a very good point. In that, to teach, to pass along those gifts that I was talking about you sharing. Nowadays, you're right. You don't need to teach. You don't need to be in an academic environment to do that. You can guest on podcasts. You can have your own podcast. Speaking of which, you just brought up. So after you publish your first book, can you walk me through to now? What did that look like? Because I'm curious how you got to the event stages, the conferences, workshops, and whatnot. So after you publish your book, what happened after that?
Yeah, so I did not realize that there was a whole nother job that happened after you hit published, and it's this big scary beast called marketing.
Yeah.
And at the time, back in 2019, when I published The Jewels of Fate, first as an ebook and then a few months later as a paperback, I knew nothing about book marketing. I was not a speaker at that time. I did not do podcasts or interviews, or even the slightest idea of what to say if I ever was interviewed. And my first interview I ever did was by a local company here in the Niagara region called Your TV. And it was this 3-minute segment while I was at one of my first trade shows. This was even like pre-book, before it was even published. And I was absolutely terrified. But that experience was given to me through a program called the Summer Company, which is basically this program that gives high school students funding to start their own business over the summer. So I applied to that and I got in, and my business ended up being publishing my book. So throughout those 2 months during that summer, I learned the importance of knowing your product and sharing about your product and even being interviewed. So that was kind of a tipping point for me to realize, oh, this is important. I need to work on this skill just as much as I need to improve my writing, because this is what is going to sell the book.
So then, what else after that?
Yeah,
So you publish the book. That happens. How does everything else kind of unfurl itself in front of you to get to now?
for sure. So at that point, I started doing a lot of research into book marketing, and I got connected with a few publishing gurus and kind of influencers who were teaching on that. So that's when I picked up things like podcasting and speaking at events. So I just started reaching out to different conferences, some totally, cold calling, like they had no clue who I was or had no association with me before. Others, it was simply someone that I knew was having a conference, and either they invited me or I saw myself as a good fit, and I asked if I could speak to their audience. So just things like that that slowly started to build. And that's probably how I got my first 5 to 10 podcasts and interviews, all of which are listed on my website, snurestories.com. And then I realized I kind of like sharing about my books, and I'm not afraid of public speaking. And it's a huge thing to be afraid of public speaking and have stage fright. And that's something I've never had to struggle with. So I thought, why not? Like, I already kind of have the skill. I just need to hone it a bit more
Yeah.
and use it to my advantage.
So when you go to these conferences, what are you speaking on? Is it being a young author? Is it the type of book that you're writing, the publishing process? What does that look like when you're speaking to these various groups?
It depends on the audience I'm speaking to. So, for example, if I'm doing a school visit, which I do a lot of school visits lately, I could speak to a grade 3, 4 audience on the importance of reading because I feel that's a topic that they need to hear at that age. But if I'm speaking to a high school audience, I have a few different presentations that I offer. One is about world building, which is great for a grade 9 who loves, maybe Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter and is working on their own novel. But that world building presentation probably wouldn't be applicable to a grade 3. So it's understanding the audience.
Yeah.
And then beyond the school visits, I speak at conferences on how to write a novel while working full time. So sometimes that presentation can look a little different if I'm speaking to a group of moms, which I did a couple of years ago. I spoke to them about how to write a novel while being a full-time mom. And of course, I've never been a mom myself, but the content that I shared is the exact same as the content of how to write a novel while being a full-time university student, which is another presentation I've given. So it's just knowing your audience and knowing the content and tweaking it a little bit to make sure that it matches who you're speaking to.
So then how do you come into your second book?
So I usually just lump them both together when I'm speaking. So I don't usually promote one or the other. It's whenever I'm talking about my books, I share about both at the same time. Because my hope is that they will buy both at the same time, which makes sense because it's a series and you can't really read the second without reading the first. And my hope is once you read the first, you're going to want to read the second. So whenever I speak about my books, I always offer them together. And there's always a tie-in somewhere in my presentation, whether I'm talking about world building or where I'm talking about the process of writing a novel. So there's some tie-in to my books where I share what they are, how you can get them, why you should read them.
What I meant was how you came upon writing now the second one. I'm assuming once you finished the first one, you were like, okay, this isn't done, or you left the cliffhanger, whatever it may be. Now, what does that process look like to then get into the second one? How did you kind of take care of the first one and marketing it and getting it out there, and then at the same time prepare to build that continue building that world into your second book?
Right. Sorry, I misunderstood the question.
No, it's all right. It's all right. Because everything you provided was still valuable anyway. That's why I was kind of like, no, go on.
So I did not know there would be a second book until after the first one came out. But I enjoyed the writing process so much, and I really fell in love with these characters, and so did my readers, that it just made sense to write a second book, and that's when I made the decision to make it into a trilogy. So the way I describe it is the first book, you can intentionally read it on your own as a standalone. Mm-hmm. The second book, The Sword of Sorrenth, you can't read it without first reading the first. I mean, technically you could, no one's going to stop you, but you'd be confused. But the end of the second book makes you want to read the third, which hasn't come out yet, which is why I get a lot of emails and messages asking me when the third book is coming out, because I intentionally designed the series that way. And that reason is because I didn't know there would be a second book until the first one came out. But I just kind of kept with the characters, and I changed the plot a little bit and developed the story more. And I just realized there was just so much more to say about this world.
So, I mean, how big are these books? Are we talking like, J.R.R. Martin kind of like tomes, or is this for young readers, or what's the age? Okay.
So the age range is of 12 to 18. I've sold to 8 to 10-year-olds as well. But the younger I go, the more I say to the parents, it depends on their reading level. There's nothing like content-wise that wouldn't be appropriate for a grade 3-year-old, but it's just more the reading level. And I mean, it's not super big, but it's a 400-page novel, so it's a little thick.
Yeah.
But 12 to 18 is who I specifically market to.
So then you said, where are you in terms of writing the third one?
I'm in the editing phase.
Okay.
So I'm about halfway through the editing right now.
So what was that process like in terms of you said you didn't know you wanted to continue to a second book until after the first one was published. When you get to that point where you decide, okay, there's more to say and I want to make it a trilogy, what does that even look like? Like how do you tackle that? Is there anxiety because you have to build not only a second tier, a second novel, but then beyond that, there's going to be a third one? Do you get nervous about, I mean, you're the only one that's thinking at that time, I want to make it a trilogy,
Mhm.
but where's your mindset at when you're like, okay, if I'm going to make it a trilogy, this is what's going to go into it. What does that look like? That preparation?
A lot of preparation. It takes me on average about 6 months to plan a novel because of that. So once I started writing the second book with the now intention of writing a third, that changed everything about how I looked at the second. So
Yeah.
every plot detail, every character was designed to propel this story into the third. So some characters I intentionally wrote because they needed to be in the third book. Some characters um, needed to die in the second book because that became relevant in the third book. So everything at that point became intertwined, and of course, then that produces this feeling of anxiety because now you're not really tackling one book, now you're tackling two, even though you're just writing the
Yeah.
first book at the time. Yeah, so it's the moving from singular book to writing a series it's a big step for sure.
What any problems with like writer's block?
Absolutely, all the time, all
Yeah.
the time, all the time.
And what do you do? Do you kind of leave and come back to it? What's your process for dealing with that?
So I define writer's block in two categories, and I talk about this in blogs and in interviews and presentations that I give. The first category of writer's block is um, mental exhaustion. So it usually happens in the editing phase where you're about 1 month, maybe 6 weeks to launch, and you're in those final stages of editing, and you have read the book over and over and over again. And it's usually at this point you say you'll never write another book again
Yeah.
because it's so like just that last grind is so brutal.
Yeah.
Um, but then you get something called mental exhaustion, which I categorize as the first writer's block. So in that instance, I recommend it's important to step back for a day or two, do something else, don't think about the book, and then come back and look at it with fresh eyes, and that will propel you to the finish line. The second type of
When you first started doing that, was it hard to step away completely?
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially because since I was on a time crunch, my first novel, when I was editing it, I was behind schedule, so I was doing double the work in half the time. So I had to push through that quite a bit and that was when I was working with a summer company too. And in order to meet the criteria of that program, I had to finish the book that summer. Otherwise, I wouldn't get the other half of the grant I applied for. So that was a
Gotcha.
lot of pressure at that time for sure.
So then
And
the second one?
yes, the second type of writer's block is creative writer's blocks. And this is where you are stuck on a character or a setting or some kind of scene. And it's essentially when you need to move from point A to point B, and you've gotten to point A and you know what point B looks like. You just have to fill in the gap. And that's where I recommend you press into that one scene and open up a new Word document and just brainstorm all of the ways you can solve that problem. So if a character feels flat, how can you make them more interesting? If there is not enough plot twists or suspense in this part of the book, how can you amp up the tension? If there are plot holes in your book and something doesn't make sense and your readers are going to be confused, how can you brainstorm around that while still keeping the integrity of the story? So that's kind of what I did. I brainstormed a bunch of ways I could solve this, creative problem, and then I picked the best one. Sometimes you need to pick one and then another one and kind of play with it a little bit. But that's kind of how you work through that creative writing block.
I'm always curious with creatives when they put out a work, when they put out a piece, whether it's a short story, a novel, any other kind of book, a music piece. But when you finally sent it off and it's published and it's out there, do you ever look back and think I should have done this, I should have written this or whatever?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Especially my first book, because it's now almost 6 years since I've written
Yeah.
Rituals of Fate.
Yeah.
Um, so I go through it sometimes when I'm creating social media content or whatever I'm doing. And I realize, oh, that scene could have been amped up a little bit more, or maybe I didn't have to include so many characters, or maybe I could have cut this character. But after you hit publish, you kind of have to let that go, because if you were still stuck in that mindset, you would never have published it in the first place. So at some point, you have to say the book is worthy to be read at this point, even if it's not perfect. And then once you make that decision, then you gotta let that go and realize it's out in the world now. You can't change it within reason. Like, I did do some tweaks
Yeah.
and grammatical editing here and there, and some authors do a relaunch of their book, but you can't keep relaunching your book or fixing a published book just because you think it could be better.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always like that sense of just that final detachment, whatever it is. I mean, whether you're giving a talk on stage, a workshop, writing, music, it's kind of like, listen, in that moment, at that time, that person I was did the best that I could. You know what I mean? That's what I knew at the time. In hindsight, everything is 2020, but I'm always curious with any kind of artist that I have on the series. Because I've had musicians, I've had painters. So I'm always curious when they send something out and they look at it later, if there's anything, how they view their work in hindsight. So Tyler, what do you consider your superpower?
What do I consider my superpower?
Yeah.
Like, in terms of writing?
Just in general.
Ooh, in
And this
general.
isn't for you because you write in the fantasy world. Like this is something I ask everybody I have on here because I'm curious. I always want to know what somebody knows they're good at. Like the thing that no one can take away from you, that's your thing. That's what you deliver the most for people around you, for your customers, clients, your
Mhm.
audience, whoever it may be.
My superpower is I can write a decent story, um, and and that took a lot of practice and a lot of trial and error. But I'm confidently in a place now where I can say that is for sure my strength is the writing piece of the story. Now, editing, formatting, book marketing, publishing, selling, all that I'm still trying to figure out. And
Yeah.
some skills I've learned, some skills I haven't, some skills I'm still horrible at.
Yeah.
But the actual writing and even like the planning and coming up with the ideas for a story and working it out, that's what I love doing, and that I feel that I'm good at.
Yeah, I haven't published the book, but I've spoken to obviously a lot of people who have on this series, and that's the piece that they speak to. They're like, I could write all day long, but then the thing that sometimes keeps them from going back into writing again, their next book, whatever it may be, is all those other after publishing activities that they have to do to get that book out there, to get the word out there, to get the marketing out there. So I feel your pain just from all the stories that I've heard in the past. And then
Absolutely.
and then one last question before we jump into your book. What does leadership mean to you?
Leadership. So I can't take credit for this quote, um, but I didn't come up with this quote. But it means a lot to me, and it's kind of how I live and carry myself through life. And the quote is, "Leadership is how other people talk about you when you're not in the room." And I'm sure everyone in the industry has heard that quote at some point. I wish I knew who said it. I can't remember off the top of my head.
I feel like I
Um,
should know, but I forget.
yeah,
I have heard it. What is it about that stands out to you?
because that's how I want to be known. I understand you can't please everyone. And obviously, if you're in the arts and you're producing a product and you're selling something, you can't please everyone. And that's why all authors say celebrate your first 1-star review, because it means you're just reaching a wider base of readers. That being said, that's why I want people to talk about me when I'm not there. Um, and I am far from perfect, and I have many flaws. Um, but I'm learning, and I try to be better than I was yesterday. And as I'm kind of taking more of a leadership role in my company, where right now I'm just like a solopreneur, like it's just me. but I'm trying to train myself to be a leader so that I can be effective leader when I do have employees when that day comes. And that kind of starts with, how do people talk about you when you're not in the room? Sometimes you'll know, sometimes you'll not know, but I always strive to treat others with respect, include everyone, because that's really how you get ahead, is when other people feel that you are rooting for them.
Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you. And now we can jump into the book. Now, you spoke
Yeah.
about how it started off as a short story from a prompt from your teacher. Can you go into the story a little bit? And then, I don't know, just because I've never had this kind of conversation, with a novel in a fantasy world, but this prompt comes your way, you write the short story. Can you give an overview of the story? And then I'm curious where the ideas came from, how you pull that into the world that you're building. Because I'm curious how much that world, right, as fantasy as it may be, reflects your thinking, who you are, what you've seen. So why don't you just kind of break down the story for us without giving away the store, but just kind of walk us through what the story is?
Yeah, for sure. So the Jewels of Fate series is a teen fantasy, like I mentioned earlier, geared towards ages 12 to 18. It is about a boy, and he lives in New York, and then he gets pulled to another world called Echinacea by the queen of this kingdom, this alternate reality kingdom. And he's asked to carry out a secret request given to him by the queen, in order to save the kingdom from a monster army. And if you want to know what that secret request is, or whether he accepts or declines, you'll have to read the book to find out. But that's a general overview of the story. And it's hard for me to talk about the second book without like going into spoilers of the first book, because like I mentioned, it's very hard to read the second book without knowing the plot of the first. So that's how I talk about my book, generally speaking, as a whole series.
So how do you come up with that then? Like, it's a prompt from a teacher. Um, I think for me, fantasy worlds, building those worlds from scratch is one of the most incredible things, right? We can watch Game of Thrones, we can watch all these different movies that have come out. We kind of take it for granted. It's a weekly show, but it's incredible what goes into an author's work where they have to kind of build each character's look, their nuance, their personality, their tone, their backstory, the way they interact with other characters.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can you share about, I guess, how you come up with what's in your story, where you draw inspiration from?
Yeah, so I'll just pull up the book again to show.
Okay.
So these are the 5 main characters right here in the story. And they all embody different characteristics and ideals. So in the series, you can fall under one of 5, they call them fields of magic. And basically what a field of magic is, it's this, it's the type of power you have and the type of ability you have, and sometimes it even affects your personality. So, for example, Chuck here, he's the main character. He is combat magic. So, combat magic wizards are very much action oriented, but they fight with magic. Whereas over here, Kayleen, this is the Princess of Echinacea. She's another major character in the book. She is elements. So, the elements are all about controlling the weather, or talking to animals or plants and nature and things like that. So all kinds of spells related to that. And so when I was designing characters and focusing on characterization, this is what I focused on, because one of my top 3 rules of building characters is diversity, and making sure every character feels different to the reader. So kind of that's where this concept of the field of magic came from, just to differentiate all the characters. But that's another big component of the series.
I'm always curious too, Tyler, and talking to authors on here, in the process of writing this, getting this book out there, how did you change? How did you evolve? Obviously, the complexity of the story is kind of, I can imagine it's draining. How did this book change you, the first book, when it came out?
It was my first time putting something out into the world that I had created. And it was the first time kind of on this entrepreneurial journey. So before that, any other way I had made money was because of, some kind of boss figure. So whether that's a paper route or babysitting, and a mom pays me to watch her kid for a few hours, things like that. But this was different. And when the first book came out, and I started selling it in exchange for money, that it, well, like I mentioned earlier, it's, you have to learn how to deal with criticism and kind of develop a shell to that, but also be willing to accept constructive feedback, because I claimed earlier, I might be a good writer, but that doesn't mean I'm the best writer, and far from it. And there's so much I don't know and so much you can learn. So it's open to constructive criticism, but also kind of developing that shell to not get hurt when people criticize your work. So I would say, in terms of how I changed, that was the biggest thing for me. And I was not prepared for that at all.
Now, when it comes to that, is it people were just criticizing the story or your writing, or how do you, in a healthy manner, how do you kind of parse out the good feedback, the good, even criticism that's productive versus something that may be toxic or off-putting? How was that process for you to kind of keep that healthy balance?
Yeah. So I also can't take credit for this concept either. But the pastor of my church, his wife wrote a book on this topic, actually, to the T. And her methodology, which I also use, it breaks down who does the criticism come from, and is it constructive or not? And is there something in there that you can learn from? So for me, the first step is looking at who is criticizing the book. Is it someone I know? Is it a close family friend? Or is it someone I have never met before? And then the next step is, are they criticizing the book, which is valid, because everyone's opinion will be different, and everyone has different experiences that influences how they perceive books and whether or not they like a book. Or is it a target at me, which has happened before? I'd say 95% the criticism has been on the book, which is great, and I learned from it, and I take that and apply it to my next book. But then there's that 5% that's just kind of like negative towards me personally as a person, and that's kind of what I disregard.
Yeah. Do you know the name of her book offhand?
It is called, I can't remember it off the top of my head. Yes, here, okay. It's called Clean Beauty for the Mind. And her name is Carleen Markham.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to look that up. Sounds interesting. Tyler, what book has inspired you?
Ooh, I got a lot. Are we talking fiction or nonfiction?
Why don't we do one of each?
Okay. So fiction, the Harry Potter series has always had a special place in my heart, not just because I think it's a great example of fantasy storytelling and that the world building is fantastic, and how J.K. Rowling weaves suspense and intrigue through the whole 7 books is phenomenal. But beyond that, I really like her personal story of how she came to write the Harry Potter series. And it's just a great example of how an underdog can win, and how when you don't give up and you keep fighting. Like, I'm not sure how much you know about J.K. Rowling, but it's just a wild story from the first book published to where the series is now. And I talk about it all the time in the presentations that I give. I always reference back to that, how much that spoke to me and encouraged me. So it was both on a personal level, but also from a storytelling standpoint. I just love the Harry Potter series so much.
Yeah.
And then for nonfiction, I read this book called Published, and it's a step-by-step practical guide on what to do after you hit published and you actually want to start selling books. and it's by a guy named Chandler Bolt, who runs the selfpublishing.com enterprise. They're a big self-publishing company in the States. But what I like about it is it's not fluff. It's very tactical. It's very practical. It's almost like a checklist, like step by step. You can go through it and do all those things. And so that's comforting as someone who is in that position that book was marketed to. You've written a book, you want to share it with friends, beyond friends and family, to other readers. How do you do that? Here's how. So I really, really enjoyed that book.
Tyler, and I forgot to go into your journey into entrepreneurship. So at what point did you launch your company? Was it between the first and the second book and this third one that's coming up? What did that look like? How did you go about that? What did you intend for it, and where does it stand now? Just kind of give me a breakdown of how that happened.
Sure. So Snure Stories was established right at the same time my first book was published, actually about a month before The Jewels of Fate came out. And it's legally, in the eyes of the Ontario government, where I'm from, it's a publishing company. So that's what I've registered it as. And currently, I'm starting to move towards that. But it's just basically the company umbrella that I do all my projects under. So I publish my books under that brand. Same with my screenwriting. And also now this coaching and working with parents that I'm doing as well. In terms of the vision, it started out as just a simple necessity, actually, for the program that I was in. They required that you have a certified business with a business name in order to receive the funding. So that was why I did it initially. And then I thought it would just be like the publishing company that I published all my books under. But now it's more of an evolved brand that's focusing on the importance of reading and the importance of young entrepreneurship, and that kind of thing.
No, I think that's incredible. And Tyler, just in wrapping up, you've spoken about the work that you're doing with the reluctant readers and your coaching. Is there, you can repeat that information if you want. Now's the time for you to kind of take the floor and kind of provide any information for things that we've spoken about, things that I might not have asked about, that I should have. Anything you want to share here to wrap this up? The floor is yours.
For sure. So I do have a free gift that I would love to offer anyone listening to this podcast. And that is what I call a reader jumpstart session. So if you're a parent listening to this and something that I've said is resonated with you, and maybe you have a reluctant reader in your life, or someone that you know that just won't pick up a book no matter how hard you try, I would love to offer you a 20-minute reader jumpstart session where I'll personally work with you to create a reading plan for your reluctant reader for the next 3 months. So I can't do this for everyone. So it's first come, first serve. I'm sure there will be a link somewhere on this page or wherever you're watching from in the comments where you can book a time with me. And I would love to work with you and help your reluctant reader find their next great book.
Tyler, what are the screenplays that you're working? You don't have to go into the details of them at all, but are they along the same lines of your books, or is it a different genre? What direction are you heading in?
Completely different genre. So they are comedies. The first one that is fully written that I'm workshopping around is a comedy mystery about a murder that takes place in a high school.
Why? Well, no, that's great that you're going in a different direction from your novels. That you're not just taking the books that you've written and applying them, adapting them to the screen, but you're going in a different direction. I think that's a great mix. That's incredible. And again, we covered Tyler's own book, The Jewels of Fate. Tyler, thank you so much for taking this time to sit down with me. Again, no, I applaud you for being able to tap into what you wanted to do with your life when you were so young and in high school, and the ability for you to pay it forward, to work with parents to get their kids on board. I think that's especially great because it's incredible. I don't know, talking to my friends, it's incredible how we've all gone through school and we didn't like reading. And then when you leave school, you can kind of go look for what it is that kind of lights you up and that you enjoy. And that's where your reading habit really picks up. So the fact that you can work with people to kind of find that enjoyment in reading is incredible. So I appreciate, I have young kids myself. So anybody that's out there doing great work like that, I really do appreciate.
Thank you so much.
And if there's anything that I might have missed, there's so much to cover in limited time, but please let me know if there's something that you feel I should have asked Tyler. I can reach out and get a response or additional insight, guidance, wisdom, information, whatever it may be. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.